You want to start really being careful here. I will go ahead and say it. I do believe Americans in particular are being poisoned through the food supply.
This is Kaiser Johnson, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for December 18th through December 25th, 2023, while supplies last. First, we feature 1 10th-ounce gold maples at just $30 over melt with a minimum order of 5. Next, we have Silver Eagles at $4.99 over spot, making this a great time to swap silver bars into Silver Eagles at the lowest premium in years. Finally, Constitutional 90% silver is just $3 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We are always privileged to have this widely studied returning guest. Alex Newman is the founder of the Liberty Sentinel. He's also a senior editor at The New American. He's a contributor at Epoch Times, and I could go on all day, but I won't. Alex, thanks for joining us again on Liberty and Finance here this Wednesday, December 20th, 2023.
Thank you very much for having me, Dunnigan. Always an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
We wanted to have you back again to talk about the concern of food safety and food integrity. There's been such a dichotomy. Ironically, those who are supposed to be our keepers, supposed to be keeping us safe in many regards, do very little to actually help promote public safety and public health, and seem to do a lot of things at the bidding of the largest big pharma, big agri, big oil, big whoever, banking, etc., to keep us doing complicit and doing what we need to do to just be cogs in the wheel. There's emerging evidence from many sources, and you just came back from the COP28 conference in the United Arab Emirates. You're going to tell us about that, what's going on kind of at the international level, putting pressure on countries to do crazy things with our food supply going forward and restricting people's freedom and liberty in that arena. We also wanted to discuss some of the principles that were brought out recently by a researcher, Elza von Hamlin. She writes for the Solari Report and has been researching this idea of pharma food, which is coming our way soon if it isn't already here. In many regards, how there are large-scale pharmaceutical-type manufacturing processes, the kinds of things that are used for creating genetically modified organisms to put into our bodies for various reasons, many of which people do not want, are also now being applied to creating non-farm food supplies for the future, non-animal, supposedly. However, some of the dark little secrets that seem to leak out about that is that a lot of this has to start with strains of fetal animal blood and all kinds of things like that in order to make it work, and bacteria that have to grow this stuff, and you got to get the toxins out, and then you have to, and a lot of this is hugely not economical. It's extremely expensive, and one wonders why would a rational world or rational companies be investing billions and billions, perhaps even trillions, in this new and emerging industry when the market doesn't want it, and it's not clear that it's safe or healthy for people. And we wonder what kind of a sort of controlled or forced or compelled policies may emerge in the near future, and some places already, where there are captive populations, whether that's in public schools, prisons, and on, and soon to be anybody who has to spend money using central bank digital currencies or CBDC being controlled on what they are permitted to buy in the form of food supplies. At the same time, we've seen this war on farmers, whether it's in the Netherlands or whether it's anywhere else in the world where there are regulations that are, as Joel Salatin, teaching farmer from Polyface Farms in Virginia, calls ridiculous regulations that make it impossible or at least extremely difficult for small-scale farmers, local organic farmers, etc., to function, but only seem to favor the mega big agri giants. So we'd like you to help us unravel what the heck is going on with these apparently inexplicable emerging changes to our food supply. Frankenfood, some people have called it. Could you start us off with sort of the big picture that you started with last time about what's going on at the global level internationally that you just came back from, and what the big trends are that we're being prepared for us there?
Well, thank you very much, Dunnigan. Again, it's great to be with you. And so they have been talking for years now about a total transformation of the food supply. And when I say they, I mean the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization based in Rome. I mean the big food companies, the major manufacturers, things like Tyson, things like Nestle, companies like this. Of course, the bioengineering component is certainly enormous. The Monsantos of the world, now Bayer, all of this is coming together. And then you have, of course, the philanthropic organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation has been the tip of the spear when it comes to this transformation of the food supply. And it was on full display at this UN climate summit I just returned from in the United Arab Emirates. Siemens had a display there about the future of farming, and it was a vertical farm where artificial intelligence was going to regulate everything just perfectly in sort of a tower-type system. Quite ironically, they had 800 parts per million carbon dioxide injected into this vertical farm, which, we're right on the other side of the conference. We're supposed to believe that carbon dioxide is a dangerous, toxic pollution that's going to kill us at 400 parts per million, which is about what we're at right now. So, they're contradicting each other while they're putting all this stuff out. But that's what they're going for. I mean, the ultimate objective, and just to skip to the end here, to the punchline, if you will, they want to completely eliminate small farmers, small ranchers, independent producers of food. They want to absorb the entire value chain into the hands of these mega public-private partnerships, if you will, PPP. Think of it like fascism, where huge corporations merge with the power of mega government and basically control you, the little people, very much along the lines of what National Socialism did in Germany, right? Yeah, you still have companies, yeah, you still have private property on paper, but it's all in the service of this monstrous hybrid entity of big corporations and big government merged together. Now, the food itself is being transformed as well. I'm glad you mentioned the biological engineering. You're absolutely right. There is no demand for this. It's totally artificial. In fact, there's a demand for food that is not biologically engineered. There's massive pressure from consumers and even from voters to try to crack down on this stuff. And I'll start off by saying this. The government put the incentives in place to make this whole industry possible. This is not an industry that would emerge organically, no pun intended, in a free market system. Only by allowing companies to have intellectual property interests in modified DNA, genetic material, can they even make this industry possible. There would be absolutely no financial incentive to invest in researching in this area unless the government would allow them to patent DNA. So that, I believe, is where the problem comes in. People say that's the free market gone amok. No, it's not. That is fascism. That is big government gone amok, because the incentive structure would not even exist if not for the U.S. government's crazy rulings going back over a period of decades now, allowing them to patent DNA that they are creating. So exceptionally dangerous, right? The things that we already know they are doing. They're working on mRNA vaccines in the food, right? This is not speculation. They've been putting out press releases about this for years. They want to vaccinate you through your lettuce. They want to use mRNA injections in cows and livestock. They are already making humanized animals, and again, this is in the literature. This is in the mainstream news. They've been putting human DNA into mouse DNA. They've been putting human DNA with pig DNA, trying to create livestock that has certain human characteristics. They're talking about harvesting the organs and maybe having biomedical purposes. But this stuff, in my opinion, is completely bonkers. It's unbelievably dangerous, and it's easy to illustrate the danger of this. Let me give you a clear example that has been a reality for a long time. So these biological engineering companies have created something they call the terminator gene, whereby they insert this genetic material into the genetics of a particular plant that is then going to be used for agriculture, corn or whatever it might be. Corn has typically been the one that they've done the most work on. Now, what this terminator gene does is it makes it so that the plant is sterile. You cannot save your seed and replant it next year, as farmers have done for thousands of years. Instead, you have to go back to your supplier of genetically engineered frankenfood seeds to acquire more seeds the next year. And they're putting all kinds of weird genetic coding into these things. And a lot of this is publicly known, right? I'm not revealing any trade industry secrets, anything like that. They are actually adding in, for example, DNA from bacteria that produce toxic substances under the guise of having the plants create their own pest control, right, pesticide, to kill the bugs that are eating it. Frankly, I don't want to eat corn that it has DNA from a toxin-producing bacteria designed to kill pests. Am I one of the pests who's going to die from this stuff? I'm just not interested in that. But again, the government has created this false system of incentives. The big crazy billionaires like Bill Gates have been pouring massive amounts of money into this because they want to control these things, right? You cannot patent regular corn. You cannot patent wheat. Bill Gates, of course, with help from his father, Bill Gates Sr., who, of course, was a patent attorney in Seattle, a very prominent, well-known patent attorney, they figured out a long time ago, and the Rockefellers figured this out 100 years ago. It's very well documented in the book Controligarchs by Seamus Brunner, that the way to make an enormous, unfathomable amount of money was to own the intellectual property and then behave as a monopolist. So they did it with software, with Microsoft. They're doing it with the biopharmaceutical complex coming out of Rockefeller University. They've been doing it for 100 years. Now they want to do it with the food supply, where all food will be genetically engineered. All food will be controlled by a tiny handful of interests, including basically the billionaire class in partnership with the totalitarian governments they want to produce. And small-scale farmers, ranchers, people who've got 10, 20, 100, 1,000 acres and some head of cattle, some sheep, they want to completely eliminate that and shift us all into the cities. And the remarkable thing now, Dunnigan, is that this is no longer speculation. We're no longer connecting dots. They're coming out and saying this publicly under the guise of global warming, under the guise of droughts, under the guise of helping feed hungry people. They have now already put these systems in place. All that's left now is to kind of close the trap door. So, folks, we are facing enormous danger. And once they get control of the food supply, they know it's game over. You're not going to be doing any rebelling if your family's going to go hungry.
Yeah, controlling the food to control the people has been a well-proven technique of monopolists and, I guess, tyrants throughout the millennia. You mentioned one thing about making it uneconomical and the regulations making it impossible for small-scale producers, family farmers, family ranchers, that sort of thing to continue operation. One of the tricks that's used, and it's directly related to this patenting of genetically modified strains of plants and that sort of thing that's used in that regards is, let's say you're a small-scale organic farmer, and next door you've got some big agri thing where they're using these patented seeds and these GMO methods of growing, and their pollen or whatever drifts onto your field, or their seeds come blowing over when they do their harvesting or whatever, and now the next year some of that stuff showing up in your crop. So number one, they've polluted your crop. They've adulterated and got their toxic GMO stuff in your crop. But the double the insult upon injury is that they'll come and sue these small-scale farmers and say, you owe us because you're now producing our patented product. Not to mention that we contaminated your product with it, but you're producing our patented product. Therefore, you owe us royalties, or we're gonna sue you and take your everything, take everything from you and shut you down.
Yeah, that's such an important point you mentioned, Dunnigan. And I think the best analogy I ever heard, and I don't remember where I heard this from, but somebody said, this is like if I take a rock and throw it through your car window and then call the police and say, hey, he has my rock and I want the car while I'm at it. Right? It is absolutely a crime spree, and yet the government is facilitating and even aiding the perpetrators in committing these crimes. So people need to realize that this is a recipe for total disaster. Once these genetic codes get out in the wild, and as you mentioned, the wind can take them, the pollen goes around, you could end up in a world where virtually all the regular strains that God designed with their native genetic code cease to exist, and all that's left is these patented frankenfoods. And I do believe that's what they want. One of the things that recently clicked for me, Dunnigan, and it took me a long time to catch this. I don't think this has become clear, even to most sensible researchers on our side. You hear the UN talk a lot about biodiversity. And the assumption has always been, and I believe this was a deliberate deception, but the assumption has always been, well, we just want to make sure that more species don't go extinct, right? We don't want every last cool frog in the rainforest to cease to exist. We want to preserve some of that biodiversity. As you start digging into these documents, these international agreements and treaties, it has finally become clear to me that we are not dealing with just saving species here. What we're dealing with, and they're saying this openly now, they want the genetic code from every organism in the world. Every single species. They want to catalog that genetic code. They want to put it in databases. They're offering now third world governments, third world kleptocracies, royalties if they'll allow these big biopharma, bioengineering interests to come in and harvest the DNA, catalog it all, bankroll it. They're offering them royalties for when they use these genetic sequences in future products, future genetically engineered frankenfoods and frankenorganisms. So people need to realize they fully, and by the way, it's not just going to be limited to food and crops and livestock. They intend to do this to everything. They've already, here in my state of Florida, they've been releasing genetically engineered mosquitoes for a long time. Thank you, Bill Gates. There's a company called Oxitec involved in this. And Bill Gates himself gave the game away. He wrote an article, I believe 5 or 6 years ago now, in the journal Foreign Affairs. This is the mouthpiece of the Council on Foreign Relations. This is the most powerful American organization you never heard of. All the bipartisan elites congregate there. It's a beehive for globalists. And Bill Gates wrote this article. If you want to know the policy of the U.S. government 2 years in advance, as Admiral Chester Ward put it when he defected from the CFR, just read their magazine, the Foreign Affairs. So Bill Gates wrote in there a piece called Gene Editing for Good. And if I'm not mistaken, this came out in early 2018. Don't quote me on the date. And as you read it, he talks about how great genetically engineered food crops are, how great it is to genetically engineer livestock, agricultural commodities. And then he says we got to do it with people too. And it's for your own benefit, of course, right? Because your children might have DNA that you wish they didn't have. Maybe they'll have some sort of disorder. Maybe they'll have some sort of this or that or the other. And so he openly calls for genetically engineering people. You've also got Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, openly promoting this idea. He's got a book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution where he expands on this quite a bit. And he's even said it in multiple public interviews now, where as part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, you can have your genetic code edited, and he says, and then the difference between this industrial revolution and previous ones is that it may change you, right? Because you're updating your genetic code. So these technologies already exist. In fact, just within the last couple of months, the FDA approved the first technology to actually edit the genes of a human being. And so we're now moving very, very rapidly in this direction. And it really is a Pandora's box. Once this is open, it's not something that we can just say, whoops, we made a big mistake. Let's put all that back in the box. Not going to happen. I believe we need to stop these people, Dunnigan, because I believe they're putting the future of humanity and all life in danger. And there's a very simple way to do it. You just take away the incentives, stop allowing these maniacs to patent DNA, and presto, the whole industry goes away.
Yeah, we were told at the end of World War II, through the Nuremberg Code, et cetera, and Geneva Convention, that forcing people to participate in medical experiments without their informed consent was unthinkable. Was basically a war crime. It was something that should never happen again. We're never going to make that mistake again. And now it's just policy. It's actually, instead of having the bad guys, quote unquote, be the ones we should go to war against to stop this, it's just the official policy. And so we've all lived through the last 3.5 years where the majority of the world's population were subjected to a medical experiment outside of their informed consent without knowing any possibility of knowing the long-term repercussions of that. And now it's being put in our food, et cetera. You mentioned a couple of things. One was about like these things of Roundup Ready crops, or crops that have built-in production, genetically modified production of pesticides within them, that sort of thing. The missing awareness, as often when we, with ignorance and hubris, think we're smarter than Mother Nature, is that the inner biome within the individual, inside our digestive tract, is equally complex to the environment around us. The number of different organisms that are necessary to live inside our own digestive system outnumbers some of the things that are outside of us. And what will be the effect of these, either Roundup Ready or whatever, on our inner bacteria and the friendly bacteria that live within our digestive system, so that we can absorb our nutrients, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you really talk about this being all done in the name of public health and public safety, make sure we have enough good food to go around, all that sort of thing, it belies the fact that there is no thought being put to where real health comes from, and what is the devastating impact that this is likely to have on people's digestive health, etc. Another example of that, with these pharma foods being actually produced by the type of large-scale production methods that are being used for genetically modified pharmaceutical products, such as growing them with bacterial strains that then have to have toxins removed and all this sort of stuff in order to create the product itself, is you end up with these things that are called novel foods. So they're outside of oversight or regulation so even people who've complained about the captured regulators, where you have the big industries really running and writing the rules for the regulators. So the people who are supposed to be watching out for public safety, the FDA or whatever, are really in the pockets of the big corporations that are telling them what's going to be necessary. But here you have these things that are considered these new genetically modified novel foods that are coming out now are considered outside the regulations because they're not. They say, oh, it's the technology, this bio editing technology is not actually happening to the food. It's just happening to the bacteria that are making the food. So the food actually isn't subject to those regulations. It's just a novel food, and therefore it's not covered. So can you talk to us about this, the lie of calling things in the name of public health? We're actually demonstrating no real concern for public health because there's no real safety testing, et cetera, being done.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And some of the early studies and research that has been done on these has shown really, really troubling things. They've done studies where they've fed genetically engineered corn to rats, and what you saw is a dramatic decline in fertility. What you saw is an explosion in cancers and tumors. And of course, this research is suppressed, right? There's nobody who has an interest in this research that is willing to fund it. So the government doesn't want to fund it. The government's in bed with the big corporations that are doing this. All the political class is on the payroll of these major biopharmaceutical agricultural interest, so they don't have an interest in it. The FDA has pulled an incredible scam here. They have claimed, obviously falsely, that genetically engineered food is substantially equivalent to regular non-genetically engineered food, and so there's no need to even look at this. It's just substantially equivalent. There's no real difference between a piece of corn and a piece of corn that has bacterial DNA to produce a toxin, or that has some sort of DNA strand that'll protect it from poison or whatever it is. So this is an incredible scam. And what it shows you, and this is not just unique to the FDA, this is true across the federal regulatory apparatus, it has become a tool of the major corporate interests. And, I say this as a free market guy. Sometimes you hear the left-wingers and the liberals kind of complaining about this, but they have a point, right? It's very well known in Washington. You talk to anybody, regardless of where they pretend to be on the political spectrum, they'll tell you about the revolving door, right? They work in the regulatory agency, and then the next year they move over to the board of one of the big companies that they were supposed to be regulating, and then 2 years later they go back and serve back in the regulatory agency. It's just a revolving door where the same group of crooks move seamlessly between the pharmaceutical companies, the biotech companies, the agricultural companies, and then back into the regulatory agencies. So these are obviously not substantially equivalent. I mean, a kindergartner could tell you that corn with genetic material designed by God or nature is not substantially equivalent to corn with genetic material designed by some mad scientist in a laboratory funded by Bill Gates of hell, right? I mean, it's obvious to a child that these things are not the same thing, and that obviously they should be getting different levels of scrutiny. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the regulatory agencies are worse than useless, right? It would be one thing if they were actually regulating. We could have a discussion about whether we ought to amend the Constitution to authorize the existence of these regulatory agencies. But we have the worst of all possible worlds. We have fake regulatory agencies that are waging war on the people they're supposed to be serving for the benefit of the interests that they're supposed to be regulating. So it's a total scam from top to bottom. As far as I'm concerned, shut it all down. And we need to move a lot of this to the state level, where states can do some experimentation, figure out what regulatory environments work. We don't want to be hostile to business, but we also don't want to facilitate ridiculous fake business models like genetic engineering our food, or worse, genetically engineering people, things that would never happen in a free market system. So, we've got a huge problem on our hands. These are not abstract concepts that our children and grandchildren might have to deal with. These are major existential threats to humanity that are happening right now. And unfortunately, nobody's really talking about them, Dunnigan. I mean, you are, and a handful of other commentators are, but you're not going to hear this stuff on Fox or CNN or NBC, maybe a commercial from the companies that are doing this stuff, but never any critical comments, never any critical reporting. And this, I believe, again, is an existential threat.
And in addition to the health impacts that you're describing and the risks and the unknowns about that, there's also the economic realities of really what this is doing is creating monopolistic power, where it's going to be forcing people, where we don't have freedom of choice, we don't have the ability to decide what we're going to eat and grow and so on in the future. Your key recommendations for people about what we can do about it?
Well, I would like to say there's a simple answer: buy organic, but unfortunately it's not that simple. The whole organic industry is plagued with scandal, is plagued with a lack of transparency. I've spoken with organic inspectors who will tell you, this whole thing is a joke. We're putting these organic certifications on garbage that came in from China. We have no idea what they did in China to show that that's organic. We're just, stamping the thing on there. So I wish I could tell you there was a simple answer. What I will recommend very highly is that you go to your local farmer's market and start developing the relationships now. Make sure you're really talking to these people. See if you can go out and visit their farm. Find out what kind of farming techniques are they using. And I'm not against industrial farming per se. I'm not one of these guys that says, we got to abolish all industrial fertilizers. We got to abolish all industrial pesticides. I don't believe that. I mean, we need to feed the people of the planet. We've got to be realistic about it. But I do think, from a personal perspective, for the benefit of you and your family, you want to start really being careful here. I will go ahead and say it. I do believe Americans in particular are being poisoned through the food supply. And it's not just the genetic engineered frankenfoods. It's all kinds of toxic substances they're putting in the food. I called my wife yesterday. I was at the grocery store. She asked me to go pick up a few things, and there was this chemical in this bread that I had never heard of. I called her up, and I don't have a smartphone, so I can't look at it. I said, hey, would you look up this thing? It was like ethyl something thol or whatever. She looks it up. It's some sort of artificial sweetener. And it's like, oh, the research shows it may be associated with cancer and decreases in fertility and all kinds of stuff like this. So I believe we are being poisoned through the food supply. And I'm not saying that to be melodramatic or exaggerate. I do believe the reason why Americans are so unhealthy and getting unhealthier by the moment is because we have been following the government's advice, right? Restaurants and stuff. Well, don't even get me started. Like the food pyramid, the biggest fraud in the world. Right? If you follow the government's food pyramid, you're going to end up obese. You're going to end up unhealthy. You're going to end up with heart disease. We cook everything we do in massive amounts of butter, organic butter, unprocessed butter. So go to your local farmer's market, meet your local farmers, see if you can come out to the farm, see how they treat their animals, see what kind of seeds they're using. And once you develop these relationships, make these farmers understand that, look, you have a market in me, right? I want to buy clean, nice, organic food that hasn't been genetically engineered, that hasn't been drenched in toxic poison, that hasn't been, processed in laboratories that do all kinds of weird research. And I do believe in the not too distant future, this is going to become more important than ever. They're trying to bankrupt all these little farmers. So the sooner you can get to know them, the sooner they know that they have a market where they can sell their produce, their meat, etc., the better off you're going to be, because the government is waging war on them. The big corporations are waging war on them. They have to know that there's a market for good products, and get together with your neighbors, right? Maybe start a buying co-op. There's more and more companies, even here where I live, there's companies now that go out to the local farms and then bring the produce back to the people here in the towns. If there's not something like that in your community, maybe it's a good business opportunity, but we have to disconnect from this wicked, wicked system, Dunnigan. And at some point in the not too distant future, I think it's actually going to be required if you want to be able to live a healthy life.
Alex, if people want to follow your ongoing work, and you are a prolific writer as well, where should they get plugged in?
Simplest place, libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for my free newsletter there. Also at thenewamerican.com. All our coverage from the climate summit will be there, thenewamerican.com. People can sign up for the printed magazine. And then X, I've been using X more since Elon Musk bought it and kind of opened it up a little bit. It's Alex Newman _JOU. And pretty regularly here on the program with you, Dunnigan. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for having me on. And hopefully we'll chat again soon.
We need to follow up with more info from you on your return from the climate conference at the UN. However, we got to let you go because I know we're all on tight production schedules, and we're going to have to have you back in January, God willing, to have you tell us more about those plans that are being laid for us and what we can do about those. Folks, thank you for being here. And to each and every one of you, have a blessed Christmas and a Happy New Year, and continue to educate and learn and fight for freedom. Alex, you're a big part of that here on Liberty and Finance, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dunnigan.
This is Kaiser Johnson, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for December 18th through December 25th, 2023, while supplies last. First, we feature 1 10th-ounce gold maples at just $30 over melt with a minimum order of 5. Next, we have Silver Eagles at $4.99 over spot, making this a great time to swap silver bars into Silver Eagles at the lowest premium in years. Finally, Constitutional 90% silver is just $3 over spot per ounce. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.